Today, I want to tell you about the time I bought a house sight unseen. And when I showed up the day of closing, I found something that looked like it was straight out of Jurassic Park. Mosquitoes everywhere, 40 buckets of human waste, 2 feet of apparently sewage in the basement, and a front wall that was about to fall off the house. This is the story of how I turned what looked like a catastrophic mistake into one of my best deals. So, first, some context. Normally, as we talked about in other videos, I buy the same type of property every time. It's a 3 bedroom brick row house. They're in the same areas. I'm using the same formula again and again. But at this point, there were some local market issues going on. Maybe want to do a deal outside of my normal target area. So I'm looking for a deal and I find a detached house, not my usual product, in an area where detached houses usually go for 210 to 220K when they need rehab. This one was listed for 165. I liked the idea of the house, but I felt like I needed even more margin for myself due to the unknown of buying outside of my area. So I pushed the price down to around 125 and buy it sight unseen. I knew there was some trash inside and some insects, but honestly, I didn't think much of it. Flash forward to the day of closing. We open the door, and I want you to picture this. The air inside the house is literally thick with mosquitoes buzzing around. We're talking, you're in there for 2, 3 minutes. You'll have your whole arm or just be covered in mosquitoes in all different directions. The walls are ripped open and hanging. That part wasn't as surprising. There's trash everywhere. And like I said, there was around 40 buckets of human waste stacked up inside. The exterior, the front of the house is rotting so badly that the area framing around the front door is soft. Like you can push on it from the outside. And we learned that nearly the whole front of the house could potentially almost fall down if too much pressure was applied to it. We go down to the basement and peer down into the basement. And on top of all this, there's around 2 feet of standing water in what smells like sewage with a huge pile of rotted wood and nails piled up in the middle of it. The neighbors come over and ask if basically if we're tearing the house down. Apparently, the prior owner had a problem and had slowly cannibalized the house in order to feed a habit and then lived there in the middle of this chaos in the middle of a normal suburban neighborhood. I'll be honest. In that moment, I felt like I'd made a serious mistake. But same as always, I decided to roll up my sleeves and fight through it. What other choice did I have? The first thing we did was secure the house. We boarded up the front and redid the framing around the front of that door so that nobody could get in. The seller had been actually living there under these conditions for years, and we didn't know if they would try to come back or give us any issue. The house was also completely buried in trees and bushes on all sides, which made it harder to know who was coming and going. We started clearing out the trash on the main levels. We had to rebuild the staircase to get to the second floor of the property. And on that floor, we found blankets and things like that pushed into the roof to keep out moisture. It was insane. We got all the trash removed. We had to use a bunch of off and bug spray, literally cans of this stuff, multiple cans while working through this project. But we got all that stuff removed, but we still had the issue of all the mosquitoes and whatever was in the basement. And that's where it gets interesting. I start looking into the basement situation, and I'm told that the sewer line to the house has collapsed. So that's a $7,000 unplanned repair right there. And the main sewer line for the house is actually about 5 feet off the ground. So even if it was open, we can't use that to drain water. I have no idea what to do. So I start Googling hazmat trucks to come in and pump out the waste and find out that that costs up to $10,000 because of special regulations around transporting sewage. So my deal budget is completely collapsing. It seems like this has been this horrible mistake. I'm sitting there really regretting this decision. Every time I buy outside of my normal buy box, I run into these problems. It's a really rough situation. So I start calling plumbers to ask how they would handle this situation. And most of them said it sounded crazy and didn't even want to think about it. But one guy asked me a question that changed everything. He said, "Well, how do you know that it's sewage?" And I stopped because the honest answer was that the neighbor told me it was sewage and it smelled like sewage. And that was it. Nothing had happened at the house. There was no visible proof that we had that it was sewage. I didn't actually know if it was or wasn't. And then he told me something that I didn't know. He said the mosquitoes breed in clean standing water, whereas flies like dirty water. So if it was sewage, then it would be more likely to be flies than mosquitoes, which meant that there was a real chance this was just old stagnant water sitting in the basement. We still had to figure it out. We didn't know. You can't just pump sewage into the street and say somebody told you it's probably not sewage. So the plumber put on a hazmat suit and boots and went down there into the basement. He came back with a bucket of water, and we could see that it had none of the markers of sewage. It was just old stagnant water. Right there, $10,000 saved. We pumped all the water out into the street and he snaked the main line. And it turned out the sewer line wasn't broken at all. The neighbor had actually been wrong. Then we pest bombed the house and almost immediately every mosquito was gone. Just like that, the two biggest problems that had me panicked were solved for maybe $2,000 or $3,000. From there, we reframed almost the entire rotted front of the house, replaced the roof, including some of the joists. And once the house was actually structurally stable, we did a substantial rehab, sort of our regular rehab, plumbing, electrical, layout changes, the works. In every rehab, we don't always do electrical or layout changes, but that was necessary in this case. So we even demoed the entire aluminum siding on the exterior and found someone to scrap it for free for us. So the neighbors who had asked us if we were tearing it down watched us as we turned it into one of the nicest houses on the block. So let's talk through the numbers. We bought the house for $125,000. We ended up spending about $100,000 on renovation. Closing costs are around $35,000 in total. All in all, is about 260 grand into the property. It appraised for 300,000, and we got an 80 LTV loan, which means we got a new loan of $240,000. So net out of pocket, we were around 20 grand, which isn't great. It's not what we're shooting for in a deal in general. But for a deal that we thought we were about to lose maybe six figures on, it was a huge win and a sigh of relief. Ultimately, we rented the house for $2,200. We have a mortgage around $1,700. So it's in a great area where the values keep rising. This was basically the worst house in the entire city, from what we can tell, in this area, in this suburb around Baltimore. And now when I talk to people about deals in that area, people tell me it's crazy to think that I'll be able to buy a detached house in that area for under 200K. So what started out looking like a comedic disaster is now something that people call a steal of a deal. So the main takeaway in this situation is interrogate your assumptions. Don't just accept what people tell you. If we hadn't gone down into that basement to face the problem, we would have never known that we could solve $20,000 worth of problems for $2,000 or $3,000. If we had just assumed the worst and torn the house down, we could have lost close to $100,000. Instead, we turned it into a win, and honestly, in a flagship deal that boosted our presence in the area. The house from Jurassic Park turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to us.